Son of the Storm Dragon by Ashton K. 423. Ren Daisuke thought my unconventional life would end after years of working in special forces and CIA. So imagine my surprise when I was died and was reincarnated as a dragon of all things in this world filled with magic and monsters. This is the story of my adventures in the greatest journey of all time, under the new name Rimuru Tempest. Chapter 26, Foundations of Trust and Loyalty. The clang of blades clashing over and over again rang multiple times across the training ground. A group of nearly 30 monsters watched from the sides as two figures clashed in a blur of motion that was almost too fast for them to keep track of. Sparks of violet and black tore through the air once more, a shockwave following right after as the two combatants came into view of the audience. The first was none other than Rimuru himself, wielding his katana within his right hand as he clashed with his opponent. Said opponent was none other than Shin, the new captain of the Royal Guard. It was still a new and slowly growing unit of only 32 individuals thus far, but that was because Rimuru had insisted that Shin go with quality over quantity, something she had surprisingly taken to heart. And as such, the new recruits were their audience for today's sparring session. Shin felt that if her subordinates got a view of what true strength looked like, they would be that much more inspired to work harder and grow stronger. This was something Rimuru couldn't really argue against, so he accepted her challenge to a spar. Hence, their current duel. "You've gotten better since our last spar, haven't you, Shin?" It was more a statement than a question. Despite the dramatic increase in his own strength after his training and devouring the orc disaster, Rimuru could still slightly feel the impact of Shin's strikes every time her large blade collided with his katana. "As expected of Lord Rimuru, even at my full strength I can't compare to you," Shin shouted with a wide, thrilled grin as she charged forward once more. The two vanished again in a blur of movement. Echoes and sparks flew through the air as their blades clashed over and over, leaving their audience in awe of the spectacle. But Shin wasn't satisfied. She was well aware that Lord Rimuru was far superior to her in every way, but still, she wanted to show him just how much stronger she had become in his absence. She wanted to prove that she actually deserved her place as head of the Royal Guards. "Lord Rimuru," Shin shouted once there was some space between the two of them, her voice echoing across the training field. "Allow me to show you the fruits of my training. Please witness my resolve." Rimuru's calm, albeit cautious expression shifted slightly, a spark of genuine interest in his eye. "All right then, show me, Shin." Taking a deep breath, Shin's stance changed. She planted her feet wide, digging them into the ground as her odachi was brought low. The violet aura around her intensified, swirling and condensing around the massive blade until it hummed with barely contained power. The air grew thick and heavy. Most of Shin's subordinates stepped back, the pressure alone telling them this attack would be dangerous if they were caught up in it. "Here I come, Lord Rimuru, decimating strike." Shin lunged towards Rimuru in one leap. The ground beneath her fractured and buckled in a 5-meter radius, leaving a trench in her wake as she charged forward. The violet glow of her odachi intensified as she brought the blade above her head, prepared to swing it down for what was sure to be a devastating strike. Rimuru watched as Shin closed the gap between them in an instant, though that time was stretched a millionfold thanks to thought acceleration. Analyzing the attack, he was easily able to break it down through great sage, its strength, trajectory, and the way Shin was pouring her all into it. He was even able to detect the imperfections of the technique that spoke of its newness and Shin's training. He could have easily sidestepped or evaded it using predictive calculation or ultra instinct. He could have teleported away or erected a defensive barrier through spatial domination. But that wasn't the point. Shin had asked him to witness her resolve. To simply evade or block the attack would be an insult to Shin and her efforts, so he would meet her head-on. Rimuru's own stance shifted as he spread his legs and lowered himself slightly, sheathing his blade in the process. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, and when they opened, the air around him suddenly changed. His own aura flared and drowned even Shin's, shaking the very ground they stood on and releasing a pressure so intense that Shin's royal guards had to move further back to avoid being consumed by it. Despite this, Shin kept pressing forward, her empowered blade descending upon him without hesitation. Rimuru couldn't help but smirk as he drew on his own blade. Black flames erupted as it was drawn from its sheath and swung upwards to counter Shin's odachi. He met her raw power with his own explosive power. There was no clang. For a single terrifying moment, there was absolute silence as the two opposing forces met each other. Then the world exploded. A dome of black flames and violet energy erupted outwards from the point of impact. It rippled across the arena, tore into the ground, and sandblasted the distant walls. The royal guard threw up their arms, bracing themselves as the wave washed over them, a gale of raw power that threatened to tear them from their feet, despite their efforts to put some distance. When the light and dust finally settled, the scene could only be described as one of utter devastation. The entire center of the arena was a shallow crater, patches of black flames dancing all over the place. At its epicenter stood two figures. Shin was down on one knee, her chest heaving as she panted for breath. Her odachi was embedded in the ground in front of her, propping her up. She looked mildly bruised but otherwise fine, only extremely exhausted. She trembled slightly from the strain, her decimating strike having drained most of her energy. But her face, despite the sweat and dirt, was alight with the most brilliant and ecstatic smile Rimuru had ever seen. Rimuru himself stood a few feet away, completely untouched, his katana already sheathed. He looked down at Shin, his expression unreadable for a moment before it softened into a proud smile. "That was a good strike, Shin," Rimuru said as he walked towards her, his voice calm and clear in the silence. "Seriously, a little more refinement and not many people would be able to take that attack unscathed." Shin looked up, her violet eyes shimmering from the praise and her smile glowing even brighter despite her fatigue. "Thank you, Lord Rimuru. I'll make sure to live up to your expectations." Once he was in front of her, Rimuru offered her a hand, and Shin took it without hesitation, allowing Rimuru to effortlessly pull her to her feet. The purple-haired Kijin stumbled for a moment before regaining strength in her legs and standing on her own. "That was amazing, Miss Shin," a young Kijin shouted as she and the rest of the Kijin came running towards the two of them. Their eyes were wide with wonder and adoration as they looked at Shin. "Indeed, to think you could force Lord Rimuru to draw his blade with such power," a hobgoblin agreed as he looked at Shin with stars in his eyes. Rimuru couldn't help but smile as he stepped back, watching as Shin's subordinates continued to sing praises of the strength she had demonstrated. She may not have dealt any damage to him, but the level of strength and skill she had shown was more than enough to earn their admiration and loyalty. "Please, Miss Shin, show us how we can become strong like you," they all shouted as they bowed their heads towards her. Shin herself was surprised by the reaction. When Lord Rimuru had told her that she would be leading a group of elite warriors responsible for the protection of Tempest's royal family, Shin had her own reservations and doubts. She didn't doubt her own strength, though she knew there was much she could do to improve. Rather, she didn't know if she could be a good leader. Back in her village, she was often labeled as brash, reckless, and hot-headed. She tended to act with her blade before thinking things through and was often guided by her emotions. But when she expressed her concerns to Lord Rimuru, he didn't even hesitate. Insisting with a smile, she took the job. "I can't say that you're wrong to have concerns, but that shouldn't stop you from trying. Being passionate isn't a bad thing, and who knows, being a leader may help you grow in some ways. Either way, I believe you're the perfect one for the job, so just do your best." Those had been the words he said to her that day, and after hearing them, there was no way she could turn down the position of head of the royal guard. While it had elevated her spirit, it didn't wash away all the doubt buried within her. But now, after hearing the showers of praise from her chosen subordinates, despite her overwhelming loss and their genuine desire for her tutelage, Shin felt a sudden surge of confidence fill her chest. Her eyes glistened for a moment as tears filled them, but she quickly wiped them away. She then stood tall with her chest puffed out in pride, the pain and fatigue from the recent spar swept away. Very well then. From today onwards, you're all members of the Royal Guards. As long as you follow my teachings well, I'll turn you weaklings into powerful warriors worthy of being Lord Rimuru's personal guard, Shin shouted with confidence. By the time I'm done with you, most of you won't even recognize yourselves. Ah ha ha. Ah ha ha ha. Rimuru couldn't help but sweat drop a little. He didn't know if he should pity the monsters under Shin, or if he should be more worried about the potential damage that may come from Shin's brutal training. But looking at her subordinates, none of them seemed bothered or intimidated. If anything, the determined and excited gaze in their eyes told Rimuru they were more than willing to follow Shin, even if they had to work and sweat for it. It seems like you had nothing to worry about after all. Not too long after, Rimuru and Shin were standing on the sidelines as the Royal Guard began their training in earnest. They had been paired up and were sparring against one another. Rimuru cast a side glance at Shin, who was looking at the training fields with a beaming smile. He could tell that she was feeling a lot better walking into her position as captain of the guard than she had been at the start. That was a good spar, Shin. It's clear that you've gotten a lot stronger since the last time we sparred, Rimuru said with a small smile. But after a second, his smile dimmed a bit. For a moment, I was worried about how the change in your aura may have affected you, especially after I heard what happened in the ogre village. During the Orc War, Rimuru had been too concerned with the ongoing events that he hadn't noticed until a few days later how Shin's aura had darkened slightly. Not in a malevolent way, but it just wasn't the same. Upon learning of Gelmude's attack on the ogre village and how Shin had been almost possessed, Rimuru had kept an eye on her, mostly out of concern more than anything else. Fortunately, Great Sage had assured him that nothing was wrong with her. Surely enough, nothing seemed out of character aside from her aura, and how she had gotten a bit stronger from assimilating that demon and making its power her own. There's no need to worry about that, my lord. There's no way I'd ever let some demon bring me down, Shin declared proudly as she brought her hand to her chest. Yeah, I guess you're just stubborn like that, Rimuru mumbled as he kept his eyes ahead. Shin could instantly tell there was something else on his mind. Is something the matter, Lord Rimuru? She asked as she turned her full attention to him. For a moment, Rimuru was silent as he wondered how to phrase his next words. Whether you could lead the royal guard or not was never a question. I know you would look after those under you as if they were from your village, Rimuru said as he cast a glance towards her from the corner of his eye. Though I'd like to ask that you take better care of yourself as well, Shin. It's fine to be passionate and even enjoy the thrill of a fight, but don't take unnecessary risks or throw away your life carelessly. Rimuru fully turned to face her, his emerald eyes meeting her violet ones. Shin could tell that he was being sincere and could feel the concern behind them. She didn't need to be told what this was about. She had nearly died twice during his absence, the first time being the encounter with the greater demon, and the second being the time the orc disaster nearly devoured her. If Lord Rimuru had arrived a moment later, there was no doubt that Shin would have been dead. With that realization, Shin's expression softened. Right, I'll try not to worry you further, Lord Rimuru. You have my word, Shin said with a small smile, her voice much softer than usual. Rimuru nodded at her promise before turning back to the training fields. He knew it would take more than words, but Shin was a dedicated person, and he doubted she would make a promise she wouldn't try her best to keep. The heavy wooden door to his office swung open with a soft creak. Rimuru stepped inside, the lingering adrenaline from his spar with Shin giving way to a comfortable sense of satisfaction. He was glad that Shin had managed to resolve her insecurities. He had no doubt that the royal guard would turn into a formidable force under her, though maybe Rimuru would have to check in on them occasionally to ensure they weren't overworking themselves. Still, he trusted Shin, and her growth since he left was visible. He looked forward to how much more she would grow with time, both as a warrior and as a leader. He entered his office, and his eyes were quickly drawn to what was becoming a pleasantly familiar and welcoming sight: the elegant and serene figure of his wife, Shuna Tempest. She was seated on one of the plush couches, a cup of steaming tea on the low table in front of her, and a few sheets of paper in her hands as she read them through with a focused expression Rimuru couldn't help but find adorable. She looked up as he entered the room, her gentle pink eyes lighting up with a warm smile that eased the last vestiges of tension within him. "Welcome back, Lord Rimuru," Shuna greeted as she stood up, her voice as soft and pleasant as always. "Come on, Shuna, how many times do I have to tell you that just Rimuru is fine?" Rimuru asked with an amused smile as he approached her, taking her hands in his. "Especially when it's just the two of us, there's no need to bother with formalities. You are my wife, after all." Shuna's cheeks blushed lightly at the sudden proximity and embarrassment at his words. She turned her gaze sideways for a moment before looking back up into his eyes. "I am sorry. I guess I'm still getting used to it," Shuna admitted, the blush on her cheeks deepening slightly. Rimuru couldn't really fault her for that. Akatsuki's village was one that valued strength, but at the end of the day, their cultures and traditions were still patriarchal. And Shuna, as the daughter of the village chief, had grown up with various expectations regarding her strength and mannerisms. Still, Rimuru knew that Shuna had a lot more to offer than just being a docile wife, who supported him in everything he did. "Don't apologize," Rimuru said with a sigh as he brought his right hand up to her cheek. He didn't want to press too much if it made her uncomfortable, but he had to make one thing clear. If it's awkward or uncomfortable, don't force yourself. Rimuru or Lord Rimuru, it's all the same. At the end of the day, I just want you to keep in mind that I'm your husband and partner before I'm your lord and master. I just feel there should be no formalities between husband and wife, at least when we're alone." Shuna's eyes widened. She had always known that Rimuru was a compassionate individual. From the moment he'd entered the ogre village, he'd been nothing short of kind, respectful, and understanding. He'd never put himself on a pedestal and saw himself as a guest, and eventually as one of them. Even when he eventually began to assume his role as guardian and leader, he ruled with a benevolent hand, rather than the firm and oppressive nature of most monster rulers. Shuna didn't know why she had expected him to be any different in their marriage. Sure, it may have started out as a political union, but Shuna's feelings had always been true, and Rimuru's affection for her was steadily rising as they spent more time together. He treated her not as some docile princess who needed protection and shelter, something her people and family often did, but rather as an individual with her own valuable skills. A genuine, radiant smile bloomed on her face. She leaned into his touch, her own hand coming up to rest on his. "Thank you, Rimuru," she said, testing the name on her tongue. "I'll try to remember." Rimuru's smile softened, pleased with her response. He gave her cheek one last gentle caress before allowing his hand to fall away. After a moment, Shuna's expression shifted slightly, regaining the composed aura of a queen consort, though the affection in her eyes never wavered. "Now that you've returned," she began as she gestured to a few sheets of paper on Rimuru's desk, her tone becoming more businesslike. A report came in earlier, a message from Gabiru. "All the preparations for today's naming ceremony in the town by Lake Cis have been completed." Rimuru nodded, his mind shifting gears to the logistical demands of his role as a leader. The process of naming monsters was a matter that Rimuru took seriously and personally. Not only would he be giving them an identity or power, but he would be creating a connection between him and the individual he named, a connection that was binding until death. Those he named would become part of his lineage in a spiritual sense. Given the number of monsters that he had to name, which numbered in the hundreds of thousands and was still rising, Great Sage had proposed a method of naming that used atmospheric magicules rather than Rimuru's own power. It would have been faster, more efficient, and less risky. But Rimuru refused. Doing so felt cheap, and he felt it also affected the overall result of the evolution. His own magicules were far more dense and powerful than normal, and so he believed it would have a more profound effect. Not to mention that the soul corridor between him and the target would be stronger if the power they received came from him directly. In the end, he went on naming them all with his own power. But of course, Rimuru wasn't all-powerful. At his current level, he could name about 300 special A ranks like the Tengu and about 4,000 additional goblins on a daily basis without putting himself into a hibernative state, particularly thanks to envy granting him superior recovery. And so he had devised a system, a naming ceremony, as the monsters of Tempest now called it. There were a total of 1 city, 4 towns, and numerous minor villages across the forest currently. The naming ceremony took place in the capital and towns. Those from villages would be brought to the nearest town for the ceremony. Rimuru would visit a different location each day and name monsters of various ranks until about 20% of his magicules remained. His spatial domination made it easy to teleport from one location to the next. The number of monsters he named varied depending on the species and their current level, but it was usually above 3,000. In the last month alone, he had named over 100,000 monsters. The orcs he had named thus far had all evolved into high orcs, all of them reaching B rank, putting them on par with the likes of ogres. A select few of them had even evolved into elite orcs, putting them on the lower end of A rank. An interesting note was that the orcs all lost their large pot bellies upon being named, their bodies becoming large, bulky, and muscular, while their female counterparts became lean and muscular. The lizard men, for the sake of progress, had been split into 2 groups, those that would evolve into Dragonutes B rank, and those that would evolve into Dragoons A rank. Most would end up taking the former route, as Rimuru didn't want to disrupt any sense of natural balance by making too many of them into Dragoons, not to mention it would be more efficient in conserving magicules. Rimuru and Great Sage made sure to take various factors into consideration, ranging from power and potential to personality. The merfolk evolved into naiads, much like Ariel and Serena. Their features became more human-like, and their control over water magic and life magic became more profound. A new ability that quickly became common among the evolved naiads was the ability to manipulate sound, more specifically, the enchanting effect of their voices upon those of weaker will. And so forth. All in all, the naming process was going smoothly. Today he would be visiting Gabiru's town by Lake Cis. Most of the monsters there had already been named. It was mainly the residents of the nearby villages and the larger lizardmen population that remained. "All right, I'll head over there in a bit then," Rimuru said as he took a seat behind his desk. The naming ceremony could wait a few minutes. He leaned back, the leather creaking softly, and his gaze remained on his wife, who had retaken her seat on the couch. "Shin's growth has surprised me," Rimuru said, breaking the comfortable silence. Shuna looked up from the couch, her gentle pink eyes focusing on him. A soft, knowing smile touched her lips. "Did it? She has been training with a fervor that would put most to shame since you left. She was quite determined to show you how much she had improved upon your return." "I'd say she succeeded. It wasn't just her power that surprised me, though. Her technique has improved as well. Not to mention she seemed a bit more mature. It's why I recommended her for the position of captain of the Royal Guard despite her initial reservations," Rimuru mused. "Still, everything worked out well today. She won the trust and admiration of her subordinates, and her own confidence has skyrocketed. "That's good, I'm happy for her," Shuna said with a soft and genuine smile. She knew better than most that Shin was a free spirit, one who struggled with following orders and taking responsibility back in the ogre village. That she was willing to take a step out of her comfort zone was a sign of her growth and her devotion to Rimuru. "But that's not the only thing on your mind, is it? You're worried about her," Shuna stated, her gaze becoming more perceptive. "I won't deny it, I am worried," Rimuru said, a wry smile touching his lips. "Shin can be a bit reckless and passionate, but in the end I know she'll do right by her subordinates. It's her sense of self-preservation that worries me. We talked about it earlier, I just hope my words actually got through to her." "If the two of you talked about it and she gave you her word, then there is nothing more for you to worry about. A promise made to you is something she would sooner die than break," Shuna said reassuringly. "You should have seen her while you were gone. She would give her all in her training and would loudly proclaim to all who would hear how she would become your #1 bodyguard, and that no harm would befall you as long as she was there." Shuna's words painted a vivid and entirely believable picture in his mind. He could almost hear Shin's loud and proud proclamations. A small chuckle escaped his lips as Rimuru felt most of his concerns melt away. Shin's recklessness wasn't born from a lack of self-worth, but from an overabundance of loyalty. That desperation to be of service, to earn your validation and approval, and to be a shield worthy of protecting you, that is the true source of her strength. Shuna stood up and approached Rimuru's desk. In a surprisingly intimate gesture, she brought both her hands to either side of his face, bringing his eyes to her own. Her next words, spoken in a gentle murmur, caught him off guard. "That's why I want you to promise me that you'll take care of her." The words held a much deeper meaning that was not missed by Rimuru. He searched her eyes for any doubts, hesitation, or jealousy, but he found nothing of the sort. Her eyes reflected the unwavering trust she had in him and a deep ocean of affection that was startling. "Are you sure?" he asked anyway. She was essentially telling him to pursue other relationships a month into their marriage. Personally, he would have waited a bit more. A harem was the end goal, but he had a rather long life ahead of him, so why rush? "I am," Shuna said with a nod as she lowered her hands. "Part of me wishes I could keep you all to myself, but I married you knowing that you might take other females as wives, and I'm sure you're aware of how Shin feels about you. To deny her a place by your side would be far too cruel." Rimuru looked at Shuna, truly looked at her, and found himself in awe of her selflessness. In a world where power and possession were often intertwined, it was rare to find someone so selfless and loving. He knew in that moment that he had found a treasure in her, something he would surely cherish. He gently released her hands, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her into a warm, firm embrace, his head leaning against hers and her hair tickling his nose. "Shuna," he murmured into her hair, "you never cease to amaze me, thank you." "There is nothing to thank me for," Shuna whispered as she leaned into him, her arms circling his back, returning the embrace. "Your happiness is my own, and I know Shin's happiness is important to you as well." The two of them remained like that for a moment, the silence of their embrace conveying far more than words could express. Rimuru understood. This wasn't just permission, it was a request. Not to let Shin's fierce loyalty go unrewarded, and not to let her heart ache in silence. "I'll find the right time to talk to her, whatever happens after that," Rimuru trailed. He didn't see a sudden marriage like what happened with Shuna, but it would be a start. Shuna nodded her head in understanding. "On that note, I want you to know that you're important and special to me, Shuna. Me taking additional partners won't change that. You're my queen." "Thank you, I think I needed to hear that," Shuna said as she pulled back from the embrace, though her arms remained around him. "Still, as your queen, it is my duty to remind you that your subjects await their king," she said as her tone changed into something more amused. Right, a king's duty is never done." Rimuru said with a chuckle as he pulled back from the embrace, the two of them lowering their arms. I guess I shouldn't keep Gabiru and his people waiting any longer, Rimuru added. See you soon and please be safe, Shuna said. She knew there was nothing to worry about, but she still felt the need to say it. Rimuru nodded his head with a smile, before activating his spatial movement, the familiar feeling of space folding around him, engulfing him, before he vanished entirely from the office. The air shimmered and warped, and in the next instant, Rimuru was standing on a newly constructed wooden pier overlooking the vast, placid expanse of Lake Cis. The scent of fresh lumber and damp earth replaced the familiar aroma of his office. The town, once the site of a single expansive cave network that was home to the lizard men, was undergoing a remarkable transformation. Sturdy multi-story buildings made of wood and stone were being erected along the shoreline, and a network of canals were being dredged to facilitate easy movement. He could see the diverse population bustling with activity. The majority were, of course, lizard men and their evolved counterparts, the dragonutes and dragoons. They assisted with construction or patrolling the town's perimeter. Among them were orcs and ants, hauling heavy timber and moving larger construction pieces, drastically increasing the speed of the town's development. Goblins, lycanthropes, and rabbit folk could also be seen moving up and about in the town, handling other tasks, while the merfolk and naiads worked tirelessly in the waters. Lake Cis had arguably the most difficult starting point of all the established settlements following the formation of the Rimuru Tempest Federation. The Orc War had been fought in the marshlands, the lands and waters tainted with blood and corpses of friend and foe, alike as far as the eye could see. Rimuru knew of the massive cleanup efforts that had taken place before the construction could begin. The clearing of corpses and the purification of the waters through the merfolk and naiads' life magic. Seeing the progress now, the water running clear and a new town rising from the ashes of conflict, filled him with a quiet sense of pride. It was a true picture of his federation at work. Lord Rimuru. Rimuru turned to the familiar voice of Gabiru. The dragoon chieftain approached with a small retinue of his elite guards, their draconic wings folded neatly behind them. His presence was even more commanding than the last time they spoke, the aura of a confident and powerful leader. It seemed entrusting him with charge over this town had been the right call, not that Rimuru ever doubted Gabiru's leadership capabilities. Once they were in front of him, Gabiru and company dropped down onto one knee, bowing their heads. Please allow me to welcome you to our humble town, my lord. Raise your head, Gabiru, Rimuru said with a small smile and a respectful nod, prompting the dragoon to rise. It seems calling this place humble is an understatement. You've made remarkable progress since my last visit, far exceeding my expectations overall. Your praise is too high, my lord, Gabiru said as his stern features softened with pride. It is your vision that has given us purpose. Without your leadership, we would be but scattered tribes, fighting for a chance of survival. The progress you see is but a testament to the hope you have given all those that follow you. Rimuru simply smiled. He knew better than to argue with Gabiru's earnest gratitude. He stepped forward and placed a hand on the dragoon chief's shoulder. Then let us continue to build on that hope together. There is still much to do, and I'm counting on your strength and wisdom to see this town prosper. Of course, my strength and wisdom are yours, Gabiru replied, his voice firm with conviction. He gestured back towards the bustling town. If you will follow me, the people have been eagerly awaiting your arrival and the start of the naming ceremony. Rimuru nodded and began to follow Gabiru through the developing town. The path they took was a testament to the sheer scale of the project. Where once were murky swamps and the entrance to the single massive cavern network of the lizard men, a new town was rising with breathtaking speed. Gabiru, walking with newfound confidence befitting the town leader and chieftain of his people, pointed out the various districts taking shape. The main residential districts are being built on the higher, more stable ground here, Gabiru explained, as he gestured to the multi-story wooden longhouses, reinforced with stone foundations. The orcs and ants have been invaluable in clearing the land and hauling the materials. I heard the cleanup was extensive, Rimuru remarked, his voice tinged with somber respect. It was, Gabiru stated as his expression turned grim for a moment. The waters were tainted and the land scarred. It took the combined efforts of all of us to restore it to its current form. But his expression softened as he looked at the bustling town. It also forged a new kind of bond between us. We rebuilt this land together. It feels like it belongs to all of us now. The tour reached its end in a large, newly leveled clearing at the heart of the town. In the center, a large, ornate chair carved from dark, polished wood had been placed on a raised dais. Before it, a line of monsters stretched as far as the eye could see: lizardmen, orcs, merfolk, goblins, lycanthropes, and more, all waiting patiently, though some appeared nervous and others excited. With a sigh that was part weariness and part contentment, Rimuru took his seat. The naming ceremonies were always draining, a constant, massive outflow of magicules, not to mention he had to get real creative when coming up with the names. Sometimes he ended up tossing out a few weird and funny ones just so he wouldn't get too bored. But still, it was one of his most important duties since founding Tempest. This was more than just granting power. It was the act of forging a direct spiritual bond with his people, welcoming them into the fold of Tempest. "Let us begin," Rimuru announced, his voice carrying over effortlessly across the clearing. "The naming ceremony shall now commence. Please step forward one at a time to receive Lord Rimuru's divine protection," Gabiru declared, his elite guards positioning themselves to act as filters to the long line of monsters. The first monster to step up was a hulking orc, with battle scars most likely from the recent war. Stopping in front of him, the orc knelt down, trembling with a mixture of fear and reverence. Rimuru smiled gently and placed his hand on the orc's head. "From this day forward, your name will be Gors. Serve Tempest well." As usual, a torrent of magicules flowed from Rimuru and engulfed the orc. Gors grunted slightly as his body transformed, his form growing slightly larger, his pot belly vanishing into a six-pack, his excess fat giving way to a bulky muscular structure and his tusks growing more pronounced. When the evolution process concluded, Gors bowed his head low, gratitude radiating from him, before stepping aside for the next individual. The process went on for a little over 5 hours. A steady stream of monsters knelt before him, and one by one, they were reborn. With each monster he named, Rimuru felt their soul corridors snap into place, each one a new thread in the vast, growing tapestry of the Jura Tempest Federation. By the time the last monster of the day had been named, it was well after noon and just about lunch time. A deep, bone-weary fatigue settled over Rimuru, the kind that came not just from a massive expenditure of magicules, but from the sheer mental exhaustion of coming up with so many names and forging so many spiritual connections. Still, looking at the crowd of monsters beginning to disperse, excitedly chatting and marveling at their transformations brought a smile to his lips, elevating the fatigue slightly. Just as Rimuru was about to stand, seeing as he was done for the day, he saw Gabiru approaching, his usual presence tempered slightly with a hint of anxiety, though it was the figure walking behind him that really surprised Rimuru. "Is that who I think it is?" Rimuru mentally questioned. "Notice, that is the individual." "I know who it is, Sage. He's just different," Rimuru said, cutting off his partner. The figure behind Gabiru, walking with a reluctance that spoke volumes, was none other than Gabiru. The lizardmen heir Rimuru hadn't seen since the day he first met and established an alliance with the lizardmen. Gone was the flamboyant, self-important heir with his ridiculous cape and boisterous attitude. In his place was a subdued, almost somber lizardman whose shoulders were slightly slumped, his gaze fixed on the ground in front of him, not daring to look up at Rimuru. He followed his father like a shadow, a stark contrast to the son who once openly defied his chief. Do I even want to know what Gabiru did to this guy? The transformation was absurd. Gabiru looked like a whipped puppy from where Rimuru was sitting. Lord Rimuru, Gabiru began, stopping a respectful distance away and giving a short, formal bow. May we have a moment of your time? Of course, Gabiru. What is it? Rimuru asked, his voice gentle but carrying the weight of his authority. At his father's subtle nod, Gabiru took a hesitant step forward before dropping down on one knee with a dull thud. His head was bowed, so low his forehead nearly touched the packed earth of the clearing. Lord Rimuru, Gabiru's voice was uncharacteristically quiet, stripped of its usual flamboyance. It was a steady, yet laced with undeniable shame. I have come to offer my sincerest apologies for my past actions. I was a fool, blinded by false promises and my own arrogance. My disrespect towards my father, towards the Dryads, and most importantly towards you has brought shame upon my family and people, and could have easily led them to ruin. There are no excuses for my behavior. He didn't look up, remaining in his kneeling position. The silence that followed was thick with the unspoken weight of his confession. Rimuru could tell that Gabiru was sincere in his apology, and could sense no falsehood from his words, only profound regret. A small, almost imperceptible sigh escaped from Rimuru's lips. If he were being honest with himself, when he confronted Gabiru back then, his emotions had still been running high from the loss of Shizue and Masayuki. In the end, he ended up taking it out on Gabiru, though his character back then didn't exactly help his case. The true target of his ire had always been Gelmude, though. Raise your head, Gabiru. Rimuru's voice was calm, cutting through the tension. Gabiru flinched but slowly did as he was told, though his eyes remained on the ground, unable to meet Rimuru's gaze. You were a fool, Gabiru. That much is true, Rimuru stated. He wasn't going to deny the foolishness of Gabiru's actions. You let your pride and sweet promises from a charlatan nearly lead your people to ruin. However, Rimuru continued, you were manipulated by someone who preyed on the weak and desperate, preyed on the ambitious, and used the chaos of my mother's own disappearance to sow discord in her domain. In that grand scheme, you were nothing more than a sacrificial pawn. What you did was indeed foolish, but some part of me believes you were trying to do right by your people, even if heavily misguided. Gabiru's head snapped up at that, his eyes wide with disbelief. He had expected condemnation, punishment, perhaps even exile from the forest altogether. He had not expected mercy or understanding. Lord Rimuru, his voice cracked as his eyes glistened with tears, before they began to fall, tracing a path down his cheeks before he could stop them. You were a pawn in a much larger game, Rimuru stated, leaving no room for further argument. Your true crime isn't betrayal but naivety. Learn from it, grow from it. That is all I ask. The weight of the pardon seemed to finally settle on Gabiru, and he let out a choked sob, his shoulders shaking with the force of his relief and shame. Gabiru, who had been watching the exchange with a hopeful expression, finally stepped forward. He placed a firm, reassuring hand on his son's shoulder before turning his gaze to Rimuru. You have my deepest gratitude, Lord Rimuru, Gabiru said as he bowed his head, his voice deep with respect. I can vouch for my son's change. The past month has not been easy for him. He has been stripped of his command, put through rigorous training, thoroughly disciplined, and made to reflect on his behavior and actions, all under my direct supervision. His remorse is genuine. That is why I wish to make a request of you, my lord. Rimuru raised an eyebrow, genuinely curious. Go on. My son, while foolish, is not without potential. He is strong and, I believe, has learned a hard lesson in humility. However, I fear that remaining here, under my shadow and the constant reminder of his shame, will stifle his growth. Gabiru said, his gaze respectfully lowered. That is why I must ask if you would grant my son your divine protection and take him, along with some of our finest, into your direct service within the capital, so he may grow without the shackles of his mistakes, and see what it truly means to be a leader. Rimuru carefully considered Gabiru's proposal and could see the logic behind it. To leave Gabiru here would be to condemn him to a life defined by one big mistake. It would take a while before he could earn the trust of his people once more. But if he came to Rimuru City, he would have a fresh start, and perhaps restore his lost honor. Rimuru also recognized the act for the masterful political move it was. By having Gabiru serve him directly, the lizard men would also have a representative in the higher levels of the Federation's forming government. Still, there was one problem that remained. Could Rimuru even grant his protection to a monster named by another? Notice, this is not a problem. Due to the individual Gelmude being deceased and Master's superior strength, it is now possible to rename the individual Gabiru and establish a soul corridor. Rimuru processed the response from his partner in a second. The path was clear, and there was no reason for Rimuru to refuse. "Very well, Gabiru, I accept your proposal," Rimuru said as he stood and walked towards the still kneeling Gabiru. "Gabiru, you have been given a second chance, a chance to not only redeem yourself, but to serve the greater good of the Federation as a whole. Accepting this would mean representing your people, and the expectations on you will be far greater than before. Are you willing to accept?" For the first time since his arrival, Gabiru finally lifted his head and met Rimuru's gaze. "Yes, Lord Rimuru, I will gladly accept and dedicate my life to serving you and the Rimuru Tempest Federation," he boisterously declared, his voice ringing with conviction that was entirely new. The flamboyance was still there, but it was tempered by a newfound humility and a desire for redemption. "Then from today, the name Gabiru will no longer be a mark of shame from past transgressions," Rimuru said as the magicules flowed out of him upon renaming the lizard men heir with the same name. "Take it and forge it into the name of a loyal member of the Rimuru Tempest Federation." The large amount of magicules cocooned around Gabiru in a brilliant display of light and a wave of power. After a moment the light subsided. The figure that emerged was barely recognizable as the same Gabiru from moments ago. Gone was the scaled lizardman, and in his place was an almost entirely human figure, his skin lightly toned. He was taller, his frame more lean and powerful. 2 wings sprouted from his back and 2 horns swept back from the top of his head. All in all, Rimuru had to admit he wasn't a bad-looking guy, and the resemblance with his father was clearly visible. Notice, the individual Gabiru has successfully evolved into a dragoon. His power was definitely greater than Gabiru's, which placed him on the higher end of A rank. This much wasn't a surprise. As Gabiru had said, Gabiru was the most skilled and talented among the lizardmen even before being named by Gelmude. Gabiru looked down at his hands, feeling the power coursing through him. Being named by Gelmude was nothing compared to the exhilaration and power he felt coursing through him now, a clear sign of the difference in power between his lord and that Magin. "Lord Rimuru," Gabiru called out dramatically as he bowed his head once more. "From this day onward Gabiru will be your faithful servant. My life and spear are yours, my lord," he declared his fealty. He had been given a chance far greater than what he deserved, but he would spend a lifetime trying to prove that he was worthy of it and that his lord had not made the wrong choice. "Good, I look forward to seeing what you will accomplish," Rimuru said with a nod. A few days following the incident of Gabiru's redemption, the oppressive heat and rhythmic ringing of hammers in the central forge of Rimuru City felt like the nation's very heartbeat. The very air tasted of coal dust and ozone, a clear sign of the hard work being poured by every individual present. Rimuru stood with Kaijin and Kuro looking over the hardworking blacksmiths in the forge. "I gotta say, Rimuru, when you told me you were building a nation, I figured we had more time before things got this busy around here," Kaijin said with a gruff, satisfied laugh, wiping a sheen of sweat from his brow. Rimuru chuckled, leaning on one of the support beams as he watched the controlled chaos. "Progress waits for no one, myself included. One night, I was the leader of a three-way alliance, and the next, I've gained control of most of the great forest of Jura. With such a large population boom, we need to be 10 steps ahead of the curve, and I'd rather all my people learn from the best. As it was, most species within the forest weren't well versed in artisan skills save for what they needed to survive. Rimuru had taken it upon himself to have various species share their crafts and skills with others, to improve the standard of living in all towns, not just Rimuru City. Clothing, smithing, construction, all of it. The only real problem was education. Monsters were by default not well learned in things like math, science, and so forth. For these things Rimuru would need access to a human settlement, maybe even find a few teachers willing to share their knowledge. But that was a problem for later. For the time being, he was satisfied with the progress everyone was making. By the way, Kaijin Kurobe, there's another reason I decided to stop by, Rimuru said as he moved towards a more private corner of the forge. I found something during the trip I took to Kannon. With everything that was going on, I pretty much shoved it to the back of my mind, not to mention I didn't want to distract you guys from your work with the new guys. Curious, Kaijin and Kurobe follow Rimuru as he approaches a nearby anvil. Rimuru stretched out his hand and pulls from his stomach 2 distinct ore samples, placing them on the anvil. The first was a dark, dense metal that seemed to drink the light from the forge, shimmering with a faint, internal luminescence. The second, a vibrant, crystalline ore that pulsed with a soft azure light. Both were emitting higher levels of magicules than the standard magisteel, with the second ore emitting a slightly heavier aura. By the gods, Kaijin murmured in awe as he approached the 2 ores, bringing down the specs of his glasses so he could properly inspect them. Rimuru, is this what I think it is? Kaijin asked as he raised his head and met Rimuru's gaze, his voice devoid of its usual boisterousness. Rimuru nodded his head, great sage, had finished its analysis of the 2 ores over the last month, and to say Rimuru had been surprised by their value would be an understatement. Yeah, the first ore is apparently known as adamantite, and the second is dracotite. From what I understand, they're both extremely rare ores, even more so than magisteel. I've never heard of such ores, but judging by the magicules alone, they must be of very high quality, Kurobe said as he leaned in and inspected the ores too. I'm not surprised you haven't heard of them. They are both extremely high-grade ores that easily surpass magisteel in performance and magicule conductivity. Adamantite can be considered the standard evolution of magisteel that has been exposed to high levels of magicules for centuries, and dracotite is similarly an evolution of magisteel exposed to high levels of both magicules and powerful draconic aura. Kaijin explained, his voice taking on a reverent tone of a master craftsman who had just found the Holy Grail. These ores are so rare that you'll never find them on the open market, and the weapons crafted from them are at least legend grade or higher. I've only seen one weapon of such caliber, and that's King Gazel's blade. To forge equipment from such materials, it's the dream of every renowned blacksmith. Well, he seems pretty excited, Rimuru thought with a chuckle. Still, everything Kaijin had just said concurred with the results of the analysis from Great Sage. It reassured him that Kaijin knew what he was doing and perhaps how to handle these materials. Well, if that's the case, then I guess I've come to the right place, Rimuru said with a smirk. His expression then shifted from casual to something more focused and serious. He then tapped on the dracotite with one finger, the ore seeming to hum in response to his touch. I was hoping that you could craft some new gear for me using these materials, more specifically the dracotite. A new sword, armor, the likes. There's something about it that resonates with me. The 2 blacksmiths turned to each other for a moment at his request, before looking down at the draconic ore. A moment of silence passed as the 2 were in a deep state of contemplation. This would be different from anything they'd done thus far. A challenge. You don't ask for much, do you, Rimuru? Kaijin finally boomed, his boisterous laugh echoing through the room. Going straight for the good stuff, I like it. That being said, it will take some time, but we'll get the job done. Glad to hear it. And don't rush the job on my account. I'd rather you work at your own pace so it comes out flawless, Rimuru said with a nod. And also don't be afraid to let me know if you need anything for this job, though keep in mind I only obtained a limited supply of adamantite and dracotite. Got it, Kaijin said with a grin and a thumbs up. We'll make sure to meet and exceed your expectations, my lord, Kurobe said in agreement. He was equally excited since this would be his first time working with such high-grade ore. Just as Rimuru was about to respond, he sensed something that caused him to turn his head to the left, and not a moment later from the shadows of the ground, Saoi suddenly emerged, as silent as the shadows themselves. Lord Rimuru, Saoi murmured as he went down on one knee and bowed his head. Rimuru immediately picked up on the urgency of his voice, drowning out the heat and noise of the forge. I bring an urgent report. Rimuru's casual demeanor vanished and was replaced by the focused calm of a ruler. Speak, Saoi. We detected a number of Pegasuses flying from the north not too long ago. Upon closer observation, we noted there were knights riding on top of them. They number 500 in total, Saoi reported. Rimuru's eyes narrowed at the news. Was this another attack? But from who? He didn't want to jump to any conclusions just yet, but they had just begun to recover from the Orc Lord invasion. Wait, did you say knights riding Pegasus from the north? Kaijin suddenly cut into the conversation. Saoi nodded his head in response. Do you know who it is, Kaijin? Rimuru asked as he turned to the dwarven smith. I believe I do, though I can't quite confirm, Kaijin said as he brought his hand to his chin in thought. During my days as a military officer in Dworgen, there was word among the generals that King Gazel had an elite unit that was not known to the public. Word had it that they rode on Pegasi and were called the Pegasus Knights. That's a bit on the nose, isn't it? Rimuru asked with a smirk. I thought the same thing when I heard it, Kaijin said with a grin. So, Dworgen, huh? If the king's elite unit is here, there's a chance Gazel himself has come, Rimuru said as a small smile appeared on his face. While nothing had been put into writing or solidified, he had established a good relationship with Gazel on their first meeting, and there were promises for future relations. I can think of a few reasons why he's here, but it's better to meet our guests at the gate rather than to keep them waiting. Saoi have Rigurd prepare the evacuation measures for the worst-case scenario, but I doubt we'll need them. Understood. Benimaru and the others have made their way to the gates, Saoi informed him. Then I better hurry, Rimuru said as he made his way to the exit. Saoi vanished into the shadows once more to complete his task. Rimuru, I'm coming with you, Kaijin shouted as he followed after. Rimuru nodded his head. Kaijin had a unique relationship with Gazel, so his presence alone may help deter any hostilities. By the time they reached the main gate of Rimuru City, a formidable reception was already in place. Benimaru stood at the forefront, his hand on the hilt of his sheathed blade, though Rimuru could see the way his fingers twitched anxiously. To his left was Shin, looking as confident and ready to fight as ever, and to the right was Gabiru, standing tall with confidence and pride. In his hand was the heirloom of his people, the Vortex Spear, a unique grade weapon, passed from one lizardman chief to another. Behind the three was a company of troops, goblin riders, Kijin, dragonutes, and dragoons. Shin's royal guard also stood behind their captain ready for battle. Not too long after his arrival, the once clear skies were filled with 500 Pegasi descending with breathtaking grace. The Pegasus Knights moved as one, their silver armor glinting in the sunlight. They landed in perfect formation, a clear sign of the discipline and order that had been ingrained into them. For a moment the air was filled with tension. A silent clash between the disciplined might of Dworgen and the monstrous power of Tempest. One knight, clad in more ornate armor that separated him from the rest, dismounted and strode forward, his heavy boots crunching on the ground, before stopping a respectable distance away. His gaze sweeps over Rimuru's assembled forces before settling on Rimuru himself. The knight then went on to remove his helmet. Rimuru's eyes widened slightly when the man behind the mask proved to be none other than Dorf, the soldier that had escorted him to Gazel following the trial with Vesta. To think he's a Pegasus knight, guess they hide in plain sight when they're not on the job. Rimuru couldn't help but smirk. It was some real CIA crap. Dorf's familiar face was a welcome sight, but the man in question was nothing if not serious at the present moment. He was clearly a soldier on duty, not here for friendly reunions, something Rimuru could respect. "I am Dorf, commander of the Pegasus Knights of the armed nation of Dworgen," he declared, his voice echoing through with practiced authority. "I come bearing a message for the ruler of this domain," he added, his eyes never leaving Rimuru. It was clear he knew who was in charge. "I am Rimuru Tempest, Chancellor of the Great Forest of Jura and ruler of the Jura Tempest Federation," Rimuru responded, his voice calm and level. Dorf nodded his head, a flicker of respect and recognition in his eyes at Rimuru's composure. He then turned slightly and raised a hand. From the center of the landed knights, another Pegasus, slightly larger and more majestic than the rest armored with gold and silver, stepped forward. Riding atop it was the imposing figure of the hero king of Dworgen himself, Gazel Dworgo. He dismounted with a powerful grace that belied his heavy armor, his sharp, intellectual eyes taking in the scene before him. He saw the disciplined army of monsters, the higher-level commanders and the young-looking Magin at their head, who radiated an aura that was many times greater than the last time they met. "Chancellor and ruler," Gazel said as his firm gaze met Rimuru's, his voice low but commanding attention. "It seems you've come a long way in the short time since we last met, Rimuru." Rimuru offered a small, confident smile, unfazed but acknowledging the hero king's presence. "A lot has happened recently, as I'm sure you're aware. Given the events, I had to step up to lead the tribes of Jura through a crisis and eventually unified them. Allow me to welcome you to the capital of our fledgling nation, the Jura Tempest Federation." "The Jura Tempest Federation, what a fitting name," Gazel said with an approving grin. "You are right, my people and I were keeping track of events in the forest. An orc lord with an army of 200,000 doesn't appear without drawing attention after all. I came to see for myself what power within these lands could quell such a calamity." "I had a feeling that was the reason you came," Rimuru responded as he nodded his head. He wasn't as surprised as he should have been that Gazel had been keeping tabs on his activities in the forest. "Rimuru, the last time we spoke, we talked of a potential alliance between our two people. But," Gazel said as he stepped forward, the air between them becoming a little bit thicker as Gazel stared down at Rimuru. "Words are cheap. They come and go like the winds themselves. I came here to see the truth of you, to judge your true nature before making any decisions that would impact the future of my kingdom." With a sharp sheeing that echoed in the sudden silence, Gazel drew his blade. A magnificent weapon sword, its steel deflected the sunlight, blinding him for a split second. The Pegasus knights behind him raised their shields, and the monsters of Tempest brought their hands to their weapons, but Rimuru stopped them with the stretch of his hand. "Notice, no malice has been detected from the individual Gazel Dworgo." Rimuru too had recognized the situation for what it was. A test, a show of strength between two leaders and a means to connect that went beyond simple words. There's an old saying that when two warriors are powerful enough, they can read each other's thoughts and intentions simply through an exchange of fists, without ever uttering a word. Rimuru was sure this was what Gazel meant, though this time they were crossing swords. "A ruler's measure isn't found in just their words," Gazel continued, "but in the weight of their blade." "Very well, King Gazel, I accept your challenge," Rimuru said as he took a deep breath and steeled his resolve. With a motion as fluid as water, Rimuru drew his own katana. He held it in a simple ready stance, his emerald eyes locking with Gazel's. The air cackled with heavy pressure. The hero king of the dwarves and the dragon king of monsters stood poised, their duel about to decide the future of two nations.